Hello, everyone. Jenna here. Thank you so much for joining us today. Hormones are essential for our overall health, and at Million Marker, we test for different hormone-disrupting chemicals like BPA, phthalates, parabens, and in hope of helping people find hormone balance. Um, Over the last few months, we actually create a lot of educational content around thyroid health, including an intro to thyroid health with Dr. Paria Vaziri. So be sure to check out our Instagram Reels feed to get some more background information on that. So there's like so much information to unpack when it comes to hormone health, and it's really hard to do it in one live session. That's why we're talking about thyroid health in more depth today with a focus on Hashimoto's. So there are actually 14 million people have Hashimoto's disease. That's why we're really glad today to be joined by Dr. Autoimmune Girl, Donna Mazzola. So she just a clinical pharmacist with extensive experience in managed care and integrative delivery system. And she's also the author of the upcoming book, The Immunity Food Fix, which you can purchase by clicking our LinkedIn bio. Hi, Donna. Sorry, I'm just doing a short intro, just getting into it. Thank you so much.
No worries. Yeah,
So glad you could join us today.
likewise.
So tell us a little bit about your educational background and what led you become an autoimmune expert.
Yeah, so I'm actually a pharmacist by background. And I also have a master's in functional medicine and human nutrition. And the autoimmune piece is actually quite personal for me because I personally have a diagnosis with Hashimoto's. And that's really what led me down the role of functional medicine, and nutrition to better understand kind of that balance between nutrition and medicine and how to combat disease.
Wow, powerful. So many of us hear the word like autoimmune disorder, but might not know what it means. Could you explain to the audience what autoimmune disease disorders is like?
Yeah, so I mean, ultimately, simply put, it's the body kind of attacking itself. And so, but really how I like to perceive it is there's an underlying immune dysregulation in the body, that's resulting in end organ damage that's occurring. So there's some type of an inflammatory process going on, and there's a reason for, I think we'll get into that, some of the reasons for these inflammatory processes. And unfortunately, we're living currently with this like chronic inflammatory state that leads the body into, kind of developing these autoantibodies against its own organs, and ultimately then us, dealing with this disease as a result.
Do you think like a hormone imbalance actually play a role in autoimmune disorders?
Absolutely. Especially for women. Majority of many, I would say a lot of the times autoimmune disorders do develop like it being postpartum, premenopausal, postmenopausal, right? So as our hormones shift and change. But yeah, unfortunately that, hormones play a critical role in the development of autoimmune diseases.
Yeah, so we're here to talk about Hashimoto's today. So what is it like? How does it tie to autoimmune disorders?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, like autoimmune diseases are a result of an underlying inflammatory process going on in the body. And so what is developing with Hashimoto's is that end organ that's a result of that inflammatory process is your thyroid gland. So when you think about various autoimmune diseases, it can be your gut, um, it can be kind of your brain really with some, so like depending on what's the end organ, like your pancreas with type 1 diabetes, I'm just kind of throwing out examples, but ultimately they all have the same underlying process. So with Hashimoto's, unfortunately, you have autoantibodies developed against your thyroid gland. And so your body is attacking your thyroid gland and destroying it. And as a result, you a cascade of events that occur and various requirements for management. So
Yeah, and then we know like thyroid is like super, super critical in everything from metabolism to growth to neurodevelopment. So what type of a thyroid condition is usually tied to Hashimoto disease and like why? Like, there because people talk about also like hypothyroidism,
yeah.
you know.
Yeah, so Hashimoto's is ultimately results in hypothyroidism, which means, as you mentioned, like the thyroid gland is responsible for your basal metabolic rate. It's responsible for so much. I always say that it's kind of like this central, um, like wheelhouse in the body that's kind of responsible for so much from a communication standpoint, metabolism standpoint, and when you have hypothyroidism, it's like everything is slowed down. So when we think about it, I think potentially probably leading into a symptoms question. So I'm just gonna just start it. This paragraph it aligns to that, but ultimately you have hypothyroidism. So as a result, like as I said, hypo, you think it's slowed down. So you have fatigue. That's a key symptom, and some people just attribute it to stress. But some like you know un I would say like fatigue that's uncommon for you, it's something to look into. So fatigue, things like brain fog, just not being able to get your thoughts straight and just kind of feeling that a little bit of scattered, not being able to get your words out. But again, thinking of slowing down, like constipation is another one. So like you're slowing down, bowel movement and motility, dry skin, dry hair. So I just think of it like slow, sluggish, dry. Those are some key, elements to consider. That yeah, there's hypothyroidism in play. And on the flip of that, I know we're focused on Hashimoto's, but just to consider, like, so there is hyperthyroidism as well, where it's kind of the opposite. So one I didn't mention is weight gain with hypo. So something you would see maybe with hyper is weight loss. So you're thinking things are more sped up. And so, a key indicator of hyperthyroidism is kind of like these bulging eyes, that, people see like from a visual standpoint. So just kind of flip the opposite. So it is what you hear, and those are kind of the key symptoms. Unfortunately though, like they're kind of sometimes non-specific. So especially when you think about our current westernized lifestyle, it's hard to pinpoint. Like many people will tell you, "Oh, what do you mean? I have a bowel movement once a week. Isn't that normal?" And it's like, no, that's not normal. So they might not pinpoint. Or yeah, I'm always tired. It's because I have kids and I'm stressed out. Or yeah, and so like everything gets attributed to stress. Not to say that stress isn't a real thing, and it can also kind of convolute in this whole process. But it is something to keep an eye out for, and just like being in tune with your body and recognizing like when things seem off balance, they probably ought.
Yeah. So what are some like a long-term effect of Hashimoto's?
So if it goes uncontrolled, I mean, I think the biggest long-term impact that I always like to bring up and consider is like the impact that it can have on your heart. From an aphid standpoint, and so for many people who will go untreated, that's I guess my greatest concern when your levels are off balanced is kind of the implications of how that can from a cardiovascular standpoint. So it's super important to and also and not so that's kind of like thinking long term, outcome mortality type, but also how you feel. You're gonna feel awful, and why should we live our life this way, and think and kind of look at it as being like a normal way of life, but when it's not, and it shouldn't be considered normal. So again, there is long term like outcomes that we need to consider, but also just considering your everyday life. Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost your quality of life that
Yeah.
that you're not really living it.
I mean, not
So
realizing there's something you can do about it. Yeah.
yeah. So who's at highest risk for developing Hashimoto's?
Yeah. So unfortunately, it's women are at the highest risk. And a lot of that does have to do with hormones. So like I said, post-pregnancy, premenopausal, postmenopausal, as our hormones start to shift and change.
Yeah.
Other thing being that, there are immune receptors on um that are kind of carried out on our estrogen. estrogen receptors that, kind of feed into like various immune cells. And so that is kind of the thought as to why women may be a little bit more prone to autoimmune diseases, because obviously that's our, key hormone as females. And so, yeah, so unfortunately that's the case. That's not, it's recognizing that there's a risk there, I think, and I think this having conversations like this so that people are aware are critical, to recognize, either an early diagnosis or even preventing one.
But is this the same sort of connection? Because when someone have Hashimoto's, that she might have other autoimmune disorders as well. So they're kind of like interconnected.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so they can be. And so that's why, the problem is once you get diagnosed with one autoimmune disease, you certainly can be diagnosed with several more. And I think the focus on that is recognizing that there is an underlying inflammatory response going on. And what we want to do is control that underlying inflammatory response, so that we don't develop future autoimmune disorders. So again, it's back to that immune dysregulation and how can we regulate the immune system? There may already be end organ damage that we cannot come back from, and it may require.
Can you hear me okay? Oh, okay, now you're back. Yes, now you're back.
Sorry, was it? Yeah, so I was saying like there may be that end organ damage that we can't recover from, that damage has already occurred, but how can we prevent further progression and further development of future autoimmune disorders? And the key to that is reducing that underlying inflammatory process and that immune dysregulation. That's the key to combating this.
Yeah, that makes total sense. It's almost the same as when we talk about asking people to decrease their toxic chemical exposure, because there's like persistent chemical exposure that we don't really have much control of this. So we really want people to control anything they can control with the transient chemicals, so you can prevent the future exposure. Love it. So are there any like a lab test a person can take to determine if they have Hashimoto's?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, checking for antibodies is what's critical. And there's your thyroid peroxidase antibodies, and your thyroglobulin antibodies. And so, I mean, your TPO, thyroid peroxidase is the most sensitive and most commonly checked. And honestly, like that's a lot of times many people will say, like, I still don't feel right, but technically my thyroid labs are normal. And what they're referring to is typically at a TSH level that's checked by majority of providers. But that may be normal or quote unquote, but again, recognizing there is a range of, a pretty broad range for what normal is. But if you still don't feel well, I always tell people to push further for, an antibody test, because you'll find, and that's happened with me personally, is my labs were technically normal, but I pushed for that and found that my antibodies were through the roof. And it was not until I got that underlying inflammatory process under control, that I was able to get my disease under control. And for many conventional medicine providers, they don't continuously check antibody tests because they feel, well, we already know you have it, so why should we continue to check it? And one thing that I always kind of put out there for people, like arm them with piece of knowledge to fight for, is the fact that that underlying antibody test is a marker of inflammation. And so you can almost track the progression of your disease or track like where you're at in the process by recognizing like where are my antibodies, and like if we see a slow reduction in our antibodies, then we're on the right track, right, to delay that progression of disease. Or if for whatever reason there is a flare that's occurred due to, let's say, a viral infection that has occurred, or exposure to toxins as we've talked about, and all of a sudden like symptomatically we're feeling worse, checking that antibody test will give you so much insight into identifying that, yes, okay, something is going on. These numbers are through the roof. Um, Again, that happened to me personally. I did have a flare, numbers were through the roof. And what was identified was there was thyroid nodules that had developed because of that underlying inflammatory process that got out of control. So important to just keep that in mind, like if from a diagnostic standpoint, but then also from a like almost like monitoring regression of disease is also critically important.
Wow, that's like super, super important information. And then also people need to be advocating for themselves when they see their medical providers. Otherwise, you just wouldn't get your answer.
Right. Absolutely. And that's why kind of what I do is to help you to advocate, right? So I'm empowering you with this information so you can ask the right questions when you're in front of your provider.
That is so important. So what are some food a person should avoid or if they want to prevent Hashimoto's
Yeah.
or flare up
The
on these?
Yeah, so I guess the simplest answer to that is to, right, at the end of the day, going back to what I said from the beginning, is reducing inflammation. So therefore reducing inflammatory foods. And those inflammatory foods, I mean, starting simply put, we can say processed foods. You know, anything that's a food-like substance, which honestly, it's majority of the foods on our grocery store shelves. They're just full of chemicals that, you know, break down our gut lining, cause inflammation, you know, lead to this immune dysregulation that's occurring in the body and continues to like fuel that autoimmune disease development and that inflammatory process. So you want to avoid processed foods. You want to avoid fast food, um, convenient foods, things like that. That's a start. And then the other thing, kind of like if you're ready to take it to the next level, other inflammatory foods being alcohol,
Hmm.
sugar, gluten, dairy, soy. So a lot of these are recognized as being inflammatory in the body, and many people that have underlying autoimmune disorders, they find when they eliminate these foods, they feel better. They see an improvement in their disease. And then I think on the flip of that is also recognizing like then what do you eat? Like what remove all these inflammatory foods. So then what foods are you putting into your body? And it's ultimately just focusing on whole foods, whole real foods. Those are the things we should be eating. And like a key takeaway I give people is if 80% of your shopping cart goes in the refrigerator, you're probably in a good spot, you know, and limiting that
Yeah.
20% to those packaged foods that go in the pantry. That's probably a good place to start and just building on from there.
That's also the exact tip what we give it to people to reduce toxins because the processed food is canned food has a ton of BPA and then packaged food it could be packaged in plastic and then like parabens also used in packaged food that's not even labeled as parabens. So again, like practicing these good lifestyle strategies, it will help you not only control your autoimmune flare but also help you reduce toxin, which then can work like hand in hand to make you healthier. Love it.
Exactly. I mean, toxins play a key role. I mean, like we're talking about foods, we're talking about underlying inflammation, but toxins is a key factor in leading to inflammation in the body, and exposure to a lot of these toxins. So as we talk about how we try to gain control of an autoimmune disease or Hashimoto's, whatever it may be, yes, you're gaining control through diet, through your lifestyle, toxin exposure. Like that's a critical element. And it's a stepwise approach. Like you can't do everything at once. So recognizing that absolutely toxin exposure can lead to development and worsening of autoimmune disorders.
Right. So, what supplement would you recommend to someone with Hashimoto's?
So key supplements that I focus on that are honestly part of just the pathophysiology of thyroid disease include things like, well, number one, vitamin D. I think everybody needs to be on vitamin D. That's a critical one. We just don't get enough of it. Vitamin D is more than just a vitamin, it's a hormone. And it at optimal levels, it actually helps to regulate the immune system. So I think that when we think about that, vitamin D is probably the most critical overall for anybody with autoimmune disease. But then as we're talking about Hashimoto's, and I recommend to everybody always test where you can without just supplementing blindly because that's not the approach we want to take. But iron is critical for you know, Hashimoto pathophysiology and for kind of that development of the actual thyroid hormones. And so a lot of times I will tell you people find, you know, a key that they're low in iron, number one, and a key symptom or side effect of that is that hair loss. So, like I said, dry hair and like losing hair is typically a key a result of like a symptom of Hashimoto's, but then what's even deeper, like as we dig to the root, why is that occurring? And it likely is stemmed from iron deficiency. And so you kind of tying it all together. So iron is critical. Selenium is critical because it's important to convert our inactive thyroid hormone to the active form. And you want the active form because that's the one that is responsible for the various metabolic processes in the body. And ultimately, when that's low, that's when you're going to feel bad. So even if you're taking thyroid medication, but you still feel horrible, it's probably because you're not
Yeah.
to that active form, and that's resulting in that continuous results in symptoms. Another one that's really critical is magnesium. Again, just kind of part of that overall pathophysiology of thyroid disorder. So, I mean, those are my key. And then kind of stepping away from the actual thyroid gland and how it works is, probiotics and focusing on our gut health. Some people are like, well, I don't need to take a probiotic, or I eat plenty of X, Y, and Z to feed my gut. But unfortunately, given our lifestyle, as given the timing of how long we've been assaulting our gut wall and our gut health and our microbiome with all the different things we put in, from antibiotic exposures, from the foods, from whatever it may be, unfortunately, you can't gain that back. So, right, we're born into this world with a microbiome. It's built up, right, with our different exposures, the foods that are put in our body. And so maybe at some point it was great, but then slowly we were reducing that, right? And we were like kind of altering and changing the overall composition of our microbiome. So fortunately, I say, even if you don't want to, I highly recommend a like highly diverse probiotic, that everybody should just take, and complementing that with prebiotics. So prebiotic foods are great. Things like kefir or sauerkraut, you know, inulin. I talked about cacao recently as a prebiotic. So those are all great. And sometimes it's easier just if you're supplementing a probiotic to also supplement with a prebiotic as well, just to make sure that you're getting the best of both worlds and kind of feeding and flourishing, nourishing those good bugs.
Love it. Love it. I know the supplement quality is also a really, really big thing. And then you do have a full script. Like, so, how can someone find you to get recommendations from you, even what to buy?
Yeah, so I have Full Script. Full Script is awesome. It's a dispensary that's only open to, healthcare practitioners. Um, and they sell only pharmaceutical grade supplements. And so unfortunately in the United States, supplements are not regulated. And there have been studies that have shown that some supplements, and I'm not going to name any names, but that are on like your supermarket shelves, although they say there's vitamin C in it, there's not even a trace of it. Or if they say there's iron, it's not even in there. And so you could be supplementing for nothing. So it's really important to take pharmaceutical grade supplements that you can trust. And Full Script kind of carries that variety. On my Full Script account, I actually have favorites. So I do go through these different supplements that I recommended, and I have my favorites that you could purchase from. But ultimately, searching the catalog, you can't go wrong, I guess is what I will say, So all the products on there have been vetted, and they only allow a certain grade. Those that go through good manufacturing practices are third-party tested. So it's a resource you can trust as opposed to using other third-party resources. Nothing against Amazon, but like Amazon, sometimes you do get, adulterated supplements that go online and are sold. And so this won't happen with Full Script. And so that's the one reason that I support it, and I put it out there for people, so that they're aware and they kind of have that reference and resource to where they can buy reputable supplements.
Yeah, that's so important. I know you also have an upcoming book, The Immunity Food Fix. When can we expect that to be out? Tell us more about it.
Yes, I do. So I'm really excited. So we talk so much right now about immunity and inflammation and food and lifestyle. And so that's really kind of a compilation of this entire book. Really gets into, um, first of all, understanding the immune system. So I think over the past couple of years, I don't know what has been thrown out there in terms of how the immune system works and what's important and how do you boost it? How do you support it? I mean, so many questions have been. So at first, like, let's get a basic understanding of what is the immune system? How does it work? What is inflammation? Inflammation is actually a good thing. I talk about that in my book. It's the chronic inflammation that we're concerned with. And so being in that chronic inflammatory state, how does that connect to the gut? the gut immunity kind of process, right? So, just key things that we know are 70% of our immune system in our gut. So obviously what you put in and what you eat is going to impact your immune system, right? If we're not keeping that balance. So I get into a lot of that. There's a lot of like good upfront information on, as we've touched on it a little bit, like how the immune system, the gut immune connection, foods, things to avoid, and just kind of like building your understanding, because I find it's really important to understand the why behind something before kind of getting to the what. And then we go through 100 superfoods. And really it's broken out. And I tell people to eat, plant-based foods, right? So I'm recommended whole foods. And people are like, well, I can't eat that many fruits and vegetables. Well, okay, that's fine. But recognizing that it's not just about fruits and vegetables. And so in the book, there's chapters on roots. So various, root vegetables that are out there, seeds, nuts, oils, herbs. So those are all things that, and various plant-based proteins like legumes, things like that. That's all plant-based food. Those are all whole foods that actually have, in each and every food, I talk about the science, and the science behind it really being the anti-inflammatory impact of each food, actually the impact on the gut, like a key, for example, I'll talk about like raspberries, for instance, actually have been shown to allow the body to increase a key bacteria in the gut that has a direct effect on our immune system. So things like that, like there's so many really good pearls in there. But ultimately how to boost the immune system, support it, reduce inflammation, and support your gut. And ultimately at the end of the day, all of that leads to preventing disease, delaying progression of disease that exists, and just living an overall healthier lifestyle. So I kind of give you the tools, and you build your script, and how you want to live your life with ultimately the foods that you like. Because if I give you what I like and what I eat, it's not going to be what you like, So everybody has to do what's going to work for them. But I'm giving you kind of the tools to get there.
I love it. And I love how you're having this really practical approach. So then people can take the tip and then digest it and then make their own way. Love it. We have like so many questions. This is like gonna be like one of our most popular live. Even before we started, we already had questions. So I already have two. I want to make sure these answered. So one question is, any special consideration for IVF with Hashimoto's?
You know, and I guess that's a really broad question around special considerations. But I mean, obviously, fertility is definitely linked. There's a lot of studies that has demonstrated fertility challenges with Hashimoto's. I think the biggest thing I would say is ensuring your Hashimoto's is under control. Number one, reducing that overall inflammation. Many times people can get pregnant without IVF if they can gain control of their underlying disease with Hashimoto's first. I mean, I've seen it happen with a couple people that I've worked with. That's a critical piece, but always, consulting your doctor. And there's nothing contraindicated in using IVF with somebody with a Hashimoto's. But again, like that's a common, infertility is common in those with Hashimoto's. And if we can gain control of the underlying disease process and inflammation, then a lot of times that can occur.
That makes sense. So another question is, how often should a level be checked during pregnancy with an unpredictable thyroid?
It should be checked regularly. So probably, if not at every visit, every other, because, thyroid hormone is critical for fetal development, fetal brain development. It's been linked to, slow, speech delays and whatnot in children. So yeah, making sure that it's an optimal range, checking it regularly. Honestly, when I was pregnant, I pushed for it to be checked every single visit because that's my baby and I want to make sure that I'm doing everything right. And if there needs to be a dose adjustment or whatnot then I need to do that. And you need to be on top of it.
Right. And I guess everyone's physiology is different. So by checking it, you can, adjust your doses or whatever in time to make sure that everything is in check. Okay, well, I think we have also a ton of questions on the live. I'm gonna trying to get to them. We have a few more minutes left. Oh my goodness, this is such a great turnout. I'm trying to get to the questions. Okay. One question is how about fatigue and feeling dizzy? How can I affect that? I guess that's a like really, really broad question.
That is, and if it's linked to your Hashimoto's, then again, it's getting to the root cause of your Hashimoto's, gaining control of it, checking levels, monitoring, and I trying to identify what's the underlying reason for it. And again, lab testing is critical. It is on so many levels, not just like nutrient lab testing, toxin lab testing, like we're talking about today. I mean, like across the board, and that's what's going to really give you answers.
Right. Totally agree. Because you can't really act on it if you don't know.
Correct.
Somebody asked, do you know how to detox hydrogen peroxide? I work with it 3 times a day.
Honestly, I don't have familiarity with directly.
Yeah, I would say if you touch it, I would wear gloves to prevent, kind of absorption through skins, wear a mask if you smell like if there's additional additives in hydrogen peroxide like VOCs and other things. That's our 2 things that came to mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally speaking, I mean, we think about detox, we think about supporting the liver. And so ensuring that you're intaking, you have proper nutrient intake, proper protein intake, right, to help detox, that you have regular elimination, whether it be through sweating, urine, regular bowel movements. I mean, those are critical things to just keep in mind when you're detoxing in general. So I think I can answer it that way.
How about iodine-rich food and iodine supplement? This is something that has been discussed. Certain regions have more cases of thyroid disease, and how does that affect Hashimoto's?
Yeah, so iodine is obviously critical for thyroid development, but unfortunately, increased iodine in Hashimoto's can actually lead to increased production of these thyroid antibodies, and obviously then kind of lead to this vicious cycle and attack. So it's not to say that we don't need any iodine, we need some, but it's a critical balance. That think that is the greatest challenge. And so just being careful. So yeah, you don't want to consume excessively iodine-rich foods because you can lead to, a worsening of your Hashimoto's, and it can worsen that overall inflammatory process. So just being careful with iodine. It's touchy, as I'll put it.
So somebody asked, what about grass-fed dairy? I guess this has to do with inflammatory food.
What I say for people is the best thing to do is an elimination diet. People have asked, how do you do that? I actually, as a result, I did develop a gut protocol. It's available on my website. But I mean, in terms of just eliminating all these inflammatory foods that I talked about and then reintroducing them and seeing how you feel. If you're one that can tolerate it, and again, monitoring levels as a result. So experiment on yourself. So it's like, you eliminate all these foods, you check your levels, see where you're at. If you're seeing a vast improvement, great. You reintroduce dairy, and then maybe 3-6 months down the road, you recheck your levels and you see that there's a rise in antibodies. Okay, then there's some type of underlying inflammation. So everybody's different. Some people can tolerate it, some people cannot. I will say that goat milk is a little less reactive than cow's milk for humans. So that's one to consider that some people do better on from an inflammatory standpoint. But again, it's everybody's different, and I think you have to eliminate and see how your body reacts and responds and reintroduce and go from there.
Yeah, that makes sense. So thank you so much. This is like, oh my gosh, so much information. I think we're gonna have to come back and like talk more. There's like so much to it.
Let's do it.
So be sure to follow Dr. Autoimmune Girl and also pre-order the book because I think this book is gonna be like so amazing. And we have it in our LinkedIn bio. And also people can tap the post promoting this live. So thank you so much, Donna.
Yeah. And right now, what I'll tell people, if you pre-order, if you go to my website, you'll see that there's 2 pre-order incentives right now. One of them being a nutrient guide. It's awesome. It's like a vitamin and supplement guide that you get to help boost your immune system. And then another one being a smoothie guide that really focuses on the colors like of the rainbow, and focuses on the various parameters like detoxification, inflammation, antioxidant support, digestive support, and what am I missing? Green, yellow, orange, and hormone balance.
Hormones.
Yeah, so I have like those kind of like the 5 colors of the rainbow, and there's smoothies that help support that based on the ingredients that work within those different systems. So you don't want to miss those pre-order incentives. They're pretty awesome. So all you gotta do is you'll find on our website, you can email immunityfoodfix@quattro.com. And then they will send you those in incentives. So just check out the link in my bio from our website, and you'll have more info. So
love it. We're gonna have to list your book on our website too. We have a page of a resource page. I think this is gonna be such a great resource. We're gonna have to list it.
Awesome. Love
So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining.
Take care.
Bye.